This is the BioCentury Show.
Brought to you by BioCentury Grand Rounds, returning in 2025 to Chicago, Illinois this June and in Cambridge, UK this September. Connect with VCs, academic innovators, and biopharma R&D and BD leaders to explore groundbreaking advancements in early-stage R&D and dive into disease biology, therapeutic modalities, and enabling technologies. Learn more at biocenturygrandrounds.com.
Hello and welcome to the BioCentury Show. I'm Simone Fishburne, Editor-in-Chief, and I am very happy today to be joined by Jérôme van Biervliet, Managing Director at VIB. More on that soon. Jérôme is a key figure in the Belgian biotech ecosystem, in particular the investor ecosystem, and is a co-founder of Biotech Ventures 1 and 2, and Avane Biocapital, and serves as president of LPAC V Bio Ventures. A lot of words there, a lot of words, right? Interestingly, Jérôme also advises the Belgian government and the European Commission on biotech matters, which we'll talk about. And leading VIB's innovation and business team, he's driven the launch of 19 VC-backed startups, secured about 140 million euros in partnering income, and established Biotech by VIB, a leading accelerator. So Jérôme, welcome to the show. And as we lead up to BioEquity Europe, that is BioCentury's annual European Investor Conference, which is this year in Bruges, it is great to be able to talk to you and dig a little bit into the Belgian biotech ecosystem. And I want to start with VIB because I am sure, and I hope this doesn't offend you, but I think many of our listeners may not be so familiar with it, right? So tell us what it is and also how you got involved.
Well, yes, thank you. And first of all, thank you very much for hosting me and for having this discussion. I'd be very happy to do so, of course. So VIB was created pretty much 30 years ago with a laudable mission of pretty much doing three things. First is we needed to increase the exposure and the quality level of the science in life science research. And we set out on this mission to be part of the global top in scientific discovery in life sciences. And we still believe that's the basis to actually then build a translational bridge to create economic opportunities, to create spin-outs, to create therapies and products for consumers. So that includes drug discovery, of which I'm sure we'll talk about, but it includes especially venture building, as was mentioned a bit already. And then finally, the last part is, as a consequence of that, we are also, as a nonprofit institution, looking after being a kind of driver behind the Belgian ecosystem, in particular in our region in Flanders, but also on the European scale. And so from that, we're indeed it's a very exciting place to be, and we're also indeed very excited to host BioEquity soon.
So a little bit about yourself. How did you get involved in that?
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story, but it's interesting because
we've got time. Yeah.
I've always admired people who can, who came from different backgrounds and have seen different environments, worked in them, and then brought the best of it to the next thing. And so I trained as a doctor in veterinary medicine, which I'd like to compare to comparative medicine because it's actually, we're all part of the animal kingdom in a way. I actually did at Cornell University, a life-changing experience for me, an internal medicine residency, and became a diplomat for the internal medicine college in America, which really opened my eyes to, what is possible, how research intertwines with clinical outcomes, et cetera. And from there, wanted to move into research because I got triggered. I actually did a PhD at VIB in biomedical sciences, on a very exciting topic on Alzheimer's disease, and I'm sure we can talk about it. And then actually moved into business consulting for a while, again with an American company, Bain & Company, well known, I believe, perhaps to your audience. And from there, basically moved into function where I'm now. And it's kind of like what I was saying, it mixes all the three aspects. We start from basic science. We try to see where are the golden nuggets, the opportunities that are too risky at the moment for others to pick up, but let's de-risk them first, bring them to a point of investable data, and then enter into business discussions with either investors or business partners. So it's a nice circle, let's say.
Well, thank you for that. I want to stay with VIB for a minute, because I think one thing that's less clear to people is what goes on the academic and research side. And I know that when we did an article maybe a year or two ago looking at academic biotech deals, you know, we had not really appreciated the degree to which VIB has this academic function. And you told me that it's a little bit like HHMI and how it works. Tell me more about the kind of academic setup you have at VIB that sits alongside the investment arm, I suppose, or separate from.
Absolutely. Actually, it's not alongside, it's actually the driver behind it. Because, so indeed, we'd like to compare ourselves to the model of HHMI, although we wish we'd have the same levels of funding. But,
which we should tell people is the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, just for those who are not sure about that, yeah.
So we are a partnership from the start between all the different universities in our region that do life science research. And basically our aim is to unite the key opinion leaders, the top, let's say the Champions League of science at the different partner universities into a single institution, and then drive their output, drive their impact in the scientific front by creating this environment which is conducive to that type of breakthrough science. In other words, for example, one of the ways we do that is not just by funding, but especially by looking at the technology ecosystem in which these people want to break boundaries of their fields. As you know, our field of research is very technology driven. So we have a very technology, let's say, aggressive technology adoption approach, where we approach companies that are still developing a research technology that could break this or that measurement barrier or this or that type of technology, and then implement it and push it through the scientists. And actually, that's a very exciting place for scientists to be, because they can see that not only do we have state-of-the-art equipment, but also the expertise to go along with it. And obviously, we are convinced, and the data show it now, that leads to high impact in academic stories, but actually also these golden nuggets we were talking about in terms of translation.
Right. So a little bit later, I want to come back to some of the specific science areas of interest for you, but I'm going to stay with what you talked about and, you know, move a little bit into the sort of political maybe arena, or it's really more structural than political. As you talk about what can be achieved on the academic side, at the same time, in the US, there's just an implosion or a potential implosion of funding. For sure, globally, there's a drawback on private funding, on venture fund, well, on capital markets. We can talk about that afterwards, but here I'm talking about government level funding. And so what I want to understand from you is, how are people in Europe digesting this? Is it an opportunity for Europe? And or does it have a negative impact on your own projects?
Yeah, so first of all, it's with pretty much astonishment, as many of the scientific colleagues.
Same here, by the way.
This is just, to be honest, and actually this is almost on the philosophical level, it's actually pretty scary, because obviously we have a bit of a closer memory of what happened not that long ago, 3 generations ago. So I think there's a lot that's happening that's to be talked about. I think indeed I'm alongside with you and the colleagues in the US. This is dramatic. I mean, it affects science funding, which lays the basis. You know, we're talking 5, 10, 15 years before things actually mature to the point where you can translate it into actual products. And some of the stories I will tell are along those lines. So it will have a long-term effect. So that's the first part. I think, is this an opportunity? Well, I think every challenge is an opportunity. We'd rather not have this, of course, but we should make, and it's been overdue, I would say, that actually Europe should step up in terms of driving its own innovation industry, but in a way which is close to our heart, in a collaborative fashion, because everything is interconnected. I mean, whether that's a good political message or not, we need to be able, and we are a small country for sure, but we're a very open economy. So I think in the science world, for sure, all of the big breakthroughs have been built on major global scientific endeavors. I mean, think of the AlphaFold breakthrough. that's based on generations of scientists working on, one structure a piece. So just to say, yeah, I think, and obviously there is an opportunity now in terms of talent. Yes, I think people are, basically being refused, so they have to move, or they're thinking, well, actually, this uncertainty is not something I can plan my life around. So there are opportunities there, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you sort of on a personal level, I left the UK at a time when there was no funding then. And, I think now the situation there is different, but there was in the sciences and beyond the sciences a huge brain drain. And many of my peers who came to America came from other places, many of people in biotech. And I don't know that in today's environment, that same me back then is coming to the United States, and Europe might look like a very interesting opportunity. But I want to go from there because part of your activities has been in advising your Belgian government and the EC, and maybe you can tell us about your role. I understand that it predated the current environment, but you still might give us some insight into what's top of mind and how important life science is in the EC priorities.
Well, actually, yes, and thank you for asking the question. I think it does indeed precede the current crisis because it's been for a long time overdue. I think I was one of the advisors during the presidency of the Council of Belgium, which rotates among countries, to set out, let's say, the ambition for the EU Biotech and Biomanufacturing Act, which is now being drafted at the moment. And so we proposed basically 3 areas of high priority to work with, and do it in a way of, either over, with a coalition of the willing member states to start, and then broaden it as it's possible, because biotech is not as strong in all areas in Europe. So the first would be, how can we increase the translation of science that is funded through public means into entrepreneurship, into startups, into professional businesses, basically, to develop these products all the way to the market. This is something which, of course, is a lot more mature already in the US. We do have excellent hubs, let's say, and quite proud to be part of that. But it's not uniform across Europe, right? And so we need to really step up there and think of ways of how to push that. And of course, we have a good example to set there. The second thing is, and this has been a little bit of a challenge, is we need to be able to finance our innovation more from European sources. There is capital in Europe, but the European capital markets have not worked so far for venture capital and for, on public markets for biotech as much as they have in the US, which results in, when you are actually a company and you're developing therapeutics, as soon as you start hitting the later stage rounds, for example, you often have to look for US-based investors or the US NASDAQ to list in order to attract sufficient amount of capital to actually just do the work you need to do. So we believe this is an absolutely missed opportunity. It's not to the exclusion of US investors, but actually it should be much more at an equal par level.
And let me just understand, is this something that the EC, like from a government perspective, you rather than the sort of capital markets themselves, you're hoping to stimulate?
I think there's, when you dig down to it, and we did, there's many things that from a government point of view one could do. Some of it, I mean, it's always complex, as always, but actually starting with a coalition of the willing member states, that's where this idea comes from, would make a lot of sense. And it's about, so a lot of, for example, on the stock markets, a lot of rules were introduced after the Euro crisis to avoid some of the risks that were clearly at the origin of the banking crisis at the time. Unfortunately, they have also sort of affected a lot the listing of biotech companies who are de facto by nature high-risk investments that don't have, the news flow or the quarterly news flow that normal companies have. And so there's many things actually when you dig down to it that can be changed or should be changed. And where, let's say, the government levels or government-based investors can play an important role. And so we're trying to help map that out and make sure that private initiative can be taken in those spaces. And then perhaps the last piece on the, sorry, just the third piece on advice is regulatory reform. You will not be surprised. without wanting to, go as drastic as some other people do it. I think it is important that we do. This is an area where we can build competitive advantage or competitiveness, let's say, by actually, taking a change and looking at not just hazards. There has to be a balance between the force and the good of innovation and bringing innovation forward and the risks they take. But so far we see the regulator as in many European countries always taken a hazard type risk. What is the hazard and how can we?
So you mean they're too risk averse,
Right.
Yeah.
And so there, I think, lining everything up, making things less complex, not the two levels of, European level and then a country member state by member state level. And then I'm thinking of approval of clinical trials, but especially market access. How can we get access
Right.
to the market? If you're a small company, this is absolutely crucial. And that's why patients in Europe are waiting the longest, right? First the US, then Canada, then Japan, and then perhaps, all the nation states in Europe. And that's not the way it should be. It should be, we can easily change that. And so those are the three big things that we try to push.
Well, Jérôme, we're going to pick up some of that conversation at BioEquity Europe. You've hit on a few really important threads. We'll take a break now, and when we come back, we'll continue the conversation.
The BioCentury Show is brought to you by BioCentury Grand Rounds. Grand Rounds. BioCentury's R&D conference will return in 2025 to the US and Europe to debate key bottlenecks in translation and unlock scientific breakthroughs with commercial potential. Connect with VCs, academic innovators, and biopharma R&D and BD leaders to explore cutting-edge advancements in early-stage R&D as we dive into disease biology, therapeutic modalities, and enabling technologies. Join us in Chicago this June after ASCO for the second BioCentury Grand Rounds US, and in Cambridge, UK this September for the inaugural Grand Rounds Europe. Register and learn more at biocenturygrandrounds.com.
Hello, we are back at the BioCentury Show. Delighted to be here with Jérôme van Biervliet of VIB. And Jérôme, I'm not saying you represent all of Belgium, but you are a great advocate for Belgium. Talked previously about bioequity, which will be there. Now, a lot of good science has come from Belgium. Ablinks is one of the big historical success stories, of course. And now, today, Argenix is another one, right? And I think it's sort of, I wouldn't say bookending it with those, but those probably are two big pillars. But there are Galapagos and quite a few others. Within Europe, I would say, maybe the UK right now is building a great ecosystem, but Belgium really is one of the sort of big centers. And I wanted to ask you, what's behind that? Is there a recycling of talent? Is that coincidence? Or are there other local factors that you think create this sort of breeding ground for biotechs?
As in any ecosystem, there's many things that have to come together. And then I am also a firm believer that you need some sort of neutral or in our case, a non-profit partner to really look up and take up the slack where the ecosystem doesn't work or function as it should. I think certainly the early stories that you mentioned were crucial. Actually, the founding team of Argenix came out of Ablinks. We started Ablinks at the start of VIB. So things take time, but so that's an absolute, talent is an absolute driver, but also good science, not just good science, because I think, and we see it as our role to look at good science, but then go where no one else will go at the moment we look at it. In other words, if we, understanding, for example, around novel targets or novel technologies, what is needed for an investor to say, this is more than actually just an interesting academic paper. Here, there's an asset here. There's IP here. There's unique know-how. There's approaches. There's concrete, tangible progress. There's differentiation, competitive differentiation on a global, international scale. All these things have to come together before we can actually either out-license or spin off a new company. And we have many, many examples of that. I'd be happy to, introduce a few if you want.
Yeah, I mean, if we have time, I'll come back to a couple of those points, but I did want to. Let's talk about Augustine, where you were a seed investor, because they recently raised what in this environment is a healthy $84 million Series A funding in March, which means, and I think, what was it? When did they start? 2019? I forget when they started exactly, but their total raise is 107 million.
Yes.
Their focus is on HDAC6, right? That's a histone deacetylase, which is a cytoplasmic regulator of various processes. So it's different from the other HDACs. Now, talk a little bit about that company and what was the science that stood out to you in that regard?
Yes, thanks for asking. It's interesting. I'm a bit connected to the story because actually it was the very first project I took up as a tech transfer manager at the time, which also tells you how long it takes to do the academic work preceding and sometimes, especially on target validation. So actually, out of human genetic studies, we were able to model mutations in some forms of Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, which replicated the disease, the hallmarks of the disease, extremely well, both functionally as well as phenotypically in the mouse, which was rather unique. But actually, through advanced studies, we then identified this histone deacetylase at the acetylation levels of tubulin, which is a key component in axonal transport, as a driver for, that was lacking or which was disturbed, let's say. And then actually we were able to access some of the cancer tool compounds to do studies in the mouse to show target validation and actually show that by restoring the acetylation levels, you can actually improve axonal transport and therefore affect the phenotype. And so we basically had a nice story there, but then actually the question came, okay, how broad is this mechanism? And is that the only mechanism? And can we extend it to the different forms of Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, etc.? So one question led to the next, and with the mindset of, okay, how relevant is this to human? Can we show it also in human samples, iPSC cells in this case? And then especially, this is, like you said, not actually a histone deacetylase, it's a cytoplasmic enzyme. How can we now translate this to chemistry, which now becomes available to patients? Because these patients have to be treated probably from quite a young age. And so it's not, a cancer therapeutic is not appropriate. And so with indeed the help of our drug discovery team internal to VIB, the discovery sciences team, we were able to design an assay cascade. We got some early stage investors on board, including VBio, and then basically got to work and show that this is an amenable approach. We could derive novel chemistry there and then drive that program forward, which is now quite a ways forward, because obviously in the meanwhile also the indications have really increased. And one of the reasons for the big big raise has been that this has become kind of a pipeline and a product. Which is very interesting from an investment point of view. So we do believe, and there's a lot of lessons to be taken there, if you allow me. I think there's, first of all, I think target validation. We already quickly talked about it. It's so important, and it actually takes such a long time sometimes. The other piece is understanding the mode of action. Is often considered by industry partners as kind of, okay, this is an academic effort. But actually, I've seen more often than not that this informs the way you do the drug design or drug discovery, especially in the early parts, but even sometimes later, because sometimes you see companies go through different managers, and actually the early stories are a bit lost. And then actually, key things or key decisions can be missed later down the road. So I think that's and then finally, the last piece is, and I've learned this through our own drug discovery team, having really talented people there that can actually do some of the key experiments in-house can really build your competitive edge. Because I can say that, in this day and age, there's many CROs who do excellent work. But actually having the curiosity and the drive to do some of the, for example, the assay design in-house really makes a big difference. And coming at it without any, let's say, prior prejudice or bias makes a big difference. And so, yeah, those are a few lessons that I've certainly taken.
So you think, so just, that's interesting that you consider that doing it in-house, the build versus buy, is more unbiased than if you go to a CRO. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, obviously, we work a lot with CROs, but it's. I do think it is important to understand in the screening cascade, for example, or in the biologics discovery, let's say workflow, what are the key elements that pertain to very important risks in your in the right technical risk, and having
you
those.
Need to,
yeah, those.
Yeah, I mean, you need to build institutional knowledge as well, right?
Exactly,
which is, you know. So I want to, stay in Belgium actually, and technologies, because when we chatted, and I don't think I'd really appreciated it, to be honest, until you pointed it out to me. There's this sort of big focus on nanobodies, where obviously Ablings was a big player in that technology with single chain antibodies, and you sort of mentioned that there's about 7 different companies. Did you say using this technology?
Yep.
So I'm interested in what is the potential, and why nanobodies? How does this stack up against other new genetic and other modalities? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, indeed. I think this ecosystem has really been at the basis of this nanobody revolution. I mean, and for the audience, I mean, if they don't know, this is a single chain antibody with the same properties as a classical antibody, much smaller. And the fragment itself can actually be used as a therapeutic as well. So we've applied it in drug discovery, for example, with Ablings, but also in combinations and novel bispecifics as a tool for drug discovery to fix certain complex targets in specific conformations, and then enable like small molecule drug discovery. So it's even been applied in food, in veterinary space, or as an inhaled drug for respiratory diseases, or even in the plant field, where you can apply it to plants and protect them from fungal diseases. So indeed, it is quite a versatile thing. And actually now we see a big wave with all the bispecifics and the next generation biologics. Yeah, this platform is uniquely placed to tap into that. But obviously, it's not just nanobodies. I just want to say, and it's also not just us. Many others are also using it. There's also many other projects which basically go more around either the biology or more traditional small molecule projects, etc.
Well, it's super interesting. I think there's another company from Belgium which is super interesting, which is called the Biotech. And I, in fact, will be interviewing their CEO at BioEquity Europe. I'm in a fireside chat, very excited about that. And Biotech is interesting because, it went to China to run a phase 1 trial. And on the back of that data, it signed a significant deal, $1 billion total, with AstraZeneca, including $425 million up front on the back of this data. So I have 2 questions about that. The first is, how much does a deal like that have a collateral boost to other companies in the ecosystem? Does it actually make a difference that it's local? And the second question is, I want to go in the direction of this phase 1 trial that they did in China. It's a very hot topic right now because the ability to generate early clinical data faster and cheaper than you can in the West. It makes sense for companies to do that. So if you could talk first a little bit about the impact on the ecosystem, and secondly, whether you think we're going to see more of this idea of going and running clinical trials in China.
Yeah, I think the effect on the ecosystem is absolutely there, and I mean a big kudos and great congratulations to the team, because it's so the effects of the ecosystem in a number of ways. First of all, a few investors can exit, and that is always good because it creates a dynamic. It creates good stories. The second, the team itself, we already mentioned it, they were just very smart operators. They were really combining a lot of technology that was out there, but in a unique way. And they came with bags and bags of experience from the past. So yes, it does have an effect, and it shows the potential. So we all in a way benefit from it. I think this drive to go to China, absolutely. I think this is also what I'm expecting. I think I would position it perhaps in a big broader sense of human first, right? I mean, even from discovery in the science, we see that already happening now. I mean, we have very important early stage companies that we launched. J Therapeutics is an example, which would have been very similar in terms of stage as Biotech, where we're looking at novel targets, validating these, where you can simply see, like we did with the Augustine case, this is just extremely repeatable, very nice biology that keeps on repeating, and it plays into the tau biology, which, as you just highlighted in your most recent issue as well, is really coming to the fore as one of the predictive markers, and becoming much more feasible to do clinical trials. And so here as well, I think the combination of either human first discovery, strong validation, and then doing exploratory trials where even on an exploratory biomarker you can see signals move in areas of high interest will garner a lot of attention, and we've seen that also in the obesity field, for example. I mean, that's just we had a company we launched, Tanai Therapeutics, which was basically an early stage drug discovery company program within VIB, but on a target so far not pursued yet, but with a double genetic link to leanness. So clearly the human biology drives it forward. And also in that context, again, if we can get into early stage or early human clinical data with some type of a biomarker is clearly the way to go.
Well, this has been fascinating. We are out of time, but I get to carry on the conversation in a couple of weeks in Bruges.
Yes.
I look forward to seeing you there, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having us.
Brought to you by BioCentury Grand Rounds, returning in 2025 to Chicago, Illinois this June, and in Cambridge, UK this September. Connect with VCs, academic innovators, and biopharma R&D and BD leaders to explore groundbreaking advancements in early-stage R&D, and dive into disease biology, therapeutic modalities, and enabling technologies. Learn more at biocenturygrandrounds.com.
Kendall Square Orchestra provides the music for the BioCentury Show. The group connects science and technology professionals and other members of the greater Boston community to collaborate, innovate, and inspire through music while supporting causes related to healthcare and education.